Hi, I wanted to make a video today for those of you who are considering becoming members and wondering if it's worth it and why go with Hardwood Guitar instead of one of those other guitar instruction websites. So I was thinking one thing that might be helpful is if I ran through some of my favorite tips. I've been teaching guitar for almost 20 years. I've helped hundreds and hundreds of private students, millions of visitors to my website, and I've learned tons of little tricks, little hacks that can have a huge impact on your playing. So I've got some tips for your fretting hand, some for your picking hand, and also some suggestions for playing and singing in a way that really moves people. All right, let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the fretting hand. So right off the bat, my first tip is fret close to the high wire. So the high wire is the name I give the fret wire that's like just this side of the finger that's fretting. So like if you're grabbing a D chord here on the first string, the high wire is going to be this strip of metal. You want to get as close to that as possible. And that's because the closer you get to the fret wire, the less hard you have to press in order to get the note to ring clearly. You can get the note to ring if you're like way back here, but you really got to crank down on the string. And, you know, sometimes your fingers are forced back there because of the shape of the chord, like a D chord. But if you can, definitely get close to the high wire. Save yourself that energy. You want to be playing with as little energy, with as little effort as possible. And so fretting close to the high wire will help you get there. Second tip, trim your fingernails. This is another tip that will help you to not waste energy. Look how closely I've trimmed my fingernails. Now everyone's fingers are shaped a little differently. Your nail bed may extend a little closer to the tips of your fingers. But your goal is to, as much as possible, prevent your nails from bumping into the fretboard before you've been able to fret the string enough. And if your fingernails are too long, they're gonna get in the way. You won't be able to arch your fingers as much. It's a huge pain. So trim your fingernails so that you don't feel like you're walking around in mud or running in sand or something when you're playing guitar. Okay, my next tip is about using your thumb. With chords that don't have a sixth string root, which means their lowest note isn't on the sixth string, it's nice to be able to damp that string with your thumb. And this is a trick that's not shown a lot, like in instructional books, especially ones written years ago. People are kind of getting on board with it more now, but let me use the D chord as an example, okay? The D chord ideally would not have the open sixth string in it. It sounds kind of dissonant and rumbly down there, right? Fifth string is okay. That sounds a lot better. And so if we bring our thumb around the top of the guitar and just lean it gently against the sixth string so that you get like a dull thunk sound, you won't even hear that thunk when you strum the guitar. But now your D sounds a lot better. That goes for any chord that doesn't have a sixth string root note. So like a C chord is in that category, A chord. The chords that are not are basically E and E minor, F, D with F sharp in the bass, G. Those are the common ones that we fret that have a sixth string bass note. So your guitar and your fretting hand size will determine whether you can do this technique to some extent. If you have a really wide neck, like if you're playing on a classical guitar, unless you've got gargantuan hands, this probably won't be an option for you. But even on a standard steel string acoustic guitar or electric guitar, some people's hands, especially women's hands, aren't big enough to get their thumb wrapped around and to still be able to fret the rest of the chord okay. With the D chord, often people's hand comes in and gets too close to this part of the guitar and they damp the first string. Try to make a tunnel with your hand like this. See how my knuckles are coming out slightly? Try to get your hand away from that first string on a D chord. See if you can get that thumb to come in and damp. The chord really sounds better that way. But if you can't, it's not the end of the world. Lots of great guitarists cannot damp with their thumb, and you just need to aim a little bit more when you strum to try to avoid that sixth string. All right, and then finally, my last set of tips for the fretting hand have to do with staying in contact with the strings as you're moving from chord to chord. One of the keys to making chord transitions fluid and quick is trying to stay in contact with the strings as much as possible so that your hand kind of has a reference as it's moving from chord to chord instead of just leaping off the strings and blindly, diving onto the next chord, hoping it finds its target. And so the first way of staying in contact with the strings is by using anchor fingers. And an anchor finger is a finger that stays in the same spot as other fingers move to the next chord. And they're not always available, but when they are, you should use them and you should keep your eyes peeled for them. So for example, with a transition from A minor to C is a classic one. When you've got A minor and C, 2 of your 3 fingers are gonna stay in the same spot as you move to the next chord, right? There's only one note different between those 2 chords. And so as you're moving from A minor, for example, keep your first and second fingers where they are and move your third finger over. You will probably want to scoot up your second finger a little bit, but technically we still call it an anchor finger. It's mostly staying in the same spot. And getting this kind of finger independence can take some time if you find that your fingers kind of spaz out and go all over the place when you try to just move that third finger. It just means you need to move slowly and make lots of repetitions as you keep a close eye on those other fingers. Just kind of lift that third finger and go, no, other fingers, stay where you are. Okay, stay there, till you move to the next chord. And over time, you'll build muscle memory so that it becomes effortless. So in the short term, it may take a little extra work to work anchor fingers into your repertoire, but in the long term, they make your life so much easier. So it's definitely worth the work up front. Okay, the second way of staying in contact with strings are, this is what I call using a lead finger. And so an anchor finger stays in the same spot, right? A lead finger stays on the same string, but it scoots to a different fret. So you can picture like a monorail train sliding along the monorail as it moves to the new chord. And doing like a D, A, E progression is a great example of this. What I'm doing here is I'm going from the D, and then when I move to A, my third finger stays on the second string and it just scoots down 1 fret to the A. And then I grab the rest to the A with these fingers. If you use a different fingering for an A, that may not be available. And then there are no lead or anchor fingers going to E, but from E back to D, you can scoot your first finger from the 3rd string 1st fret up to the 2nd fret, making the transition to D a lot easier. So keep your eyes peeled for those lead fingers too. And you can train that in the same way that I just showed you how to train anchor fingers. The last trick is something, I've never read about this or learned it. It's just something I noticed in my own playing. I gave it the name an artificial lead finger. So let's say you're playing like an open D down here, and then you need to like fly up the neck to grab something like a voicing like that. This would be a more advanced technique. And you want to be able to grab that higher shape easily. It's a big leap to get up here, and if you totally let go with your fretboard, I'm even having a hard time grabbing this shape without using my trick. So the artificial lead finger involves basically when you're starting to make a big move up or down the neck, you move one of your fingers onto a different string, the string that it needs to end up on. And so with this shape that I'm making up here, my middle finger, my 2nd finger is on the 3rd string, 11th fret. But down here, it's on the 1st string. So as I start moving, I hop my middle finger over to the 3rd string, and that gives me a guide to slide up to that 10th position. And again, over time, when you practice this, it can make can make that transition a lot quicker and easier. Okay, now let's look at your picking hand. It's going to be the hand holding the pick, strumming or picking hand. I'm not going to talk about finger style technique. That's a whole other thing. So I'll just focus on the guitar pick today. So the first thing I want to show you is a trick for holding the pick so that your strumming sounds even and it doesn't fly out of your hands as easily. Holding on your pick is one of the hardest things about playing guitar, and still occasionally my pick flies out of my hand. So no shame if that happens to you a lot. It happens to the best of us. But there are some ways that you can hold on to it that make things a little easier. First of all, if you were like studying from a heavy metal shredder, or hard rock electric guitarist who mostly does lead guitar and doesn't pay as much attention to like their gentle strumming technique, they're probably going to show you how to hold the pick like this, where you just like make kind of a fist with your hand and then stick your pointer finger, the side of it, against the pick like that. And that works really well if you're doing like super technical fast picking. It gives like this rigid, it kind of makes the pick a part of your hand. And so there isn't a lot of play in it. And you can imagine how that would be good for very precise, fast movements. But we're shooting for something different if we're strumming the guitar. I do like to pick fast, and I use a grip kind of like that for picking fast, but I've come up with kind of this hybrid grip that works well for both strumming and picking quickly. And it looks more like that, so it's a little looser grip. And see how my pointer finger is kind of pointing a little bit more down toward the floor instead of straight back at my palm like this. So I go a little bit like that. And then if I'm strumming, instead of trying to pick fast, I put a little bit more of the pad of my finger against the pick. And your pad of your finger is a little sweatier typically, a little grippier than the side of your finger. The skin on the side of your finger tends to be a little drier. And a little bit of sweat or moisture on your finger will help you grip the pick. I've noticed on really cold days, if I'm playing outside and I don't have that moisture on my fingers, it's a lot harder to play guitar. But normally there's a little bit of moisture there and that helps me hold on. So I like to get that pad of my finger against the pick. The pad also has a little bit more surface area than the side of your finger. And so that will also help you grip your pick more easily. And what you're shooting for is a grip that both, will control the pick and hold on to it, but you can also hold on to it lightly enough so that it will flex between your fingers. And it's hard to do that with this kind of, shredder grip that I was talking about earlier. So I like that one pad of the finger, it's a little bit at an angle. You can see it's like not exactly like this. It's not exactly like that. It's kind of somewhere in between. It's a good middle ground. Some people hold on to their pick like this. This is how I learned to play because I was self-taught for many years. There's really only one or two professional guitarists I know of who hold their pick like this though, with two fingers. And I think the reason is there's a little less control there. Now, Steve Howe from the progressive band Yes holds his pick like this, and he has great control. So, it's possible. But if you're kind of on the fence about how to hold the pick and you've been holding it like this, I would encourage you to consider this just because so many people have found this to be a better grip for them. So the second tip I want to give you is about getting an even sound when you're strumming. And one problem that I see a lot of guitarists having as they're learning to strum evenly is they make too small of movements with their strumming arm, like this. What they're trying to do there is control their strum and hit the strings accurately. And so it's understandable why someone would want to strum like this, but I want to encourage you, if you strum like that, to strive toward tracing kind of a bigger arc with your guitar pick. If you imagine like your guitar pick had some ink on the tip of it and there was a sheet of paper on the face of your guitar, you'd be drawing an arc, a little bit of a side of a circle as you move your arm up and down, right? And this curved line that you're drawing should not just go from like here to here, because that's going to sound kind of choppy as you strum over the strings. You need the pick to pass more quickly over the strings without speeding up your song. You know, you need to play it at the right speed. And so you can play slowly, but still have a nice burst of sound if you swing your arm more. Now, depending on the song, you may want to strum just more with your wrist. As the tempo speeds up, you use more wrist and less elbow. But especially with a slow song, you're going to want to make a big swing with your arm to get that lovely burst of sound out of your strings instead of it sounding all choppy like that. Along those same lines, just try to hold on to your pick as lightly as possible, as I was saying earlier. And it just takes a lot of practice to learn to do that without the pick flying out of your hand. But again, that's your goal. Finally, I want to show you a technique that you're going to want to use as you move into playing individual strings, or maybe you're there already. So one example of something kind of early on that acoustic guitarists tend to encounter is when they start playing with bass strum technique. This is like... this kind of country technique. It's not just used in country music, but that's kind of the classic example. And, when you're playing like that, you're having to sometimes hit one specific string. And especially in the context of like doing a lot of strumming, it can be really hard to hit the right string. And I struggled with this for years. And eventually I developed a technique that I then realized was being used by tons of other great guitarists. I would watch, close-ups of people like Joe Satriani and Doc Watson, and their picking hand was doing similar things to what I had learned to do just on my own. And so I like teaching my students this now so that they can kind of learn this more quickly than I did. So I call it a brushing technique. And I use that term because what you're doing is you're touching the guitar as you're playing. And I use the term brushing to differentiate between that and like planting your hand somewhere. You don't want to like stick your hand on your guitar hard. You can do that with your pinky if you're finger picking, but if you're using a guitar pick, you want your wrist to move freely, and so you don't want to be restricting that motion by pressing on your guitar somewhere. But what you can do is just lightly touch it. And for bass drum technique, a good place to touch it is with the ulnar part of your hand, the karate chop part of your hand, on the bridge pins of your guitar, or on an electric guitar, it would be, the saddles. And so check this out. I'm going to just play that alternating bass again. And you see my picking hand there. It's really close to the guitar. It's actually bouncing up and down lightly off the bridge pins. And that's keeping my hand oriented. And it's not a quick fix. It's not going to really improve your playing right away. But over time, as your hand and your kind of proprioception gets used to this feeling of the bridge pins under your hand, it will start connecting with this feeling with like playing the fifth string, and this feeling with playing the fourth string. And so your body starts learning where it is in space better by touching your guitar like that, as opposed to just like hovering over the strings like this. I just messed up. I messed up again. Yeah, I have a really hard time playing like that because you have no point of reference except every time the pick hits the strings. And if you hit a wrong string, then it's too late. So it's a lot easier if you're touching your guitar as you're picking individual strings. All right, I want to finish today by just going over some tips for playing with the proper emotion. So a couple of these will be singing tips, but the first one is just whether or not you're singing. If you're playing a song with like any kind of like verse chorus structure, it usually sounds best, not always, but it usually sounds best if you have quiet and loud parts in the song. And so what I like to encourage my private students to do if like they're preparing a song to perform for people is to map out in the left margin of their chart how loud they want each section of the song. And we just, often use soft, medium, and loud. And the classic way to do this in a song is to make your intro and often the second verse more quiet. And then you get a couple times in the song where you're building from quiet to loud. So like the intro's quiet, first verse is kind of medium or quiet, and then you have a medium or loud first chorus. And then you back off again and make the second chorus kind of quiet. And then the second verse, is that what I said? Second verse, kind of quiet. And then the second chorus is louder. And then often there's a breakdown or a bridge in the song that's quieter. And then the final chorus, you make the loudest and the highest energy. And what I'm really talking about here is energy. You don't need to be like screaming your head off in the loud parts, but you just have more energy, or it's often a little louder and you're just being more forceful with your performing. And those what are called dynamics, the loud and soft parts in the song, can just bring so much emotion to the song. And it's just easy to forget to do that. And you'll notice that once you start doing it and you remember to do it, you are suddenly playing with so much more passion, and it's so much more captivating to listen to. My second tip for performing with emotion, very simple. Always sing 100%. Unless there's a sleeping baby in the next room, try to always sing with a full voice and with as much emotion and passion as you can, because you need to make it a habit, especially if you start, singing in front of or with other people and you feel self-conscious. Many of us do when we sing. You want this habit to be so ingrained that you just kind of perform beautifully automatically. And so try not to have two voices, like your voice that you use when you're performing at home and you're kind of distracted or you're not thinking about your singing as much, and then a different voice that you have when you're actually trying to sound good. Try to sound good all the time. Make it a habit. I think you'll also enjoy your practice more because you connect more emotionally with the music when you're singing 100%. And then my final tip for performing with emotion is something that I teach members of Heartwood Guitar in all the premium song lessons that I teach. I include this as part of the lesson because I think it can be so powerful. I call it memory mining, and it's a way of feeling the emotion of the lyrics in a song you're singing in a deep way. When we're covering songs, we didn't write that song. We didn't experience the emotions that the original songwriter was experiencing when they wrote it. And so it can be a little hard for us to connect with these lyrics that, sometimes are kind of puzzling, or, I didn't experience this thing that happened in the song, but I love the song. And so a way of connecting with it is to look at the lyrics closely and also to think about how the music makes you feel, and try to come up with one central core emotion that's driving the song, like maybe longing or sorrow or joy. And then think back in your own life to a time where you felt that emotion powerfully. A lot of my members of Heartwood Guitar are like retirement age, and they're wondering if membership would be right for them. And it can be challenging, if you've got arthritis or something. That can provide some extra challenge to learning the guitar. On the other hand, I see us older folks playing guitar as also having a wealth of experience over the course of our lives that help us connect more with music. So I ask, my young students to use this memory mining technique, and often they're like, I've never felt this emotion really before, or I can't think of a time. But, those of us who've lived a long life have a wealth of experience that they can use for this technique. So think of a memory where you felt this emotion powerfully, and then try to immerse yourself in that memory before you start singing the song. Try to remember how you felt in that moment. Picture yourself in that moment. Take yourself on a little mental exercise of visualizing that memory to bring those emotions up powerfully in you. And then when you start singing the song, you're kind of reliving that memory as you're performing. And this is a technique that actors use in order to kind of get into their part. That's how I learned it. And when you use this technique regularly, it really is a powerful experience of kind of reliving powerful emotional moments again as you perform music. That's kind of how I feel when I perform on stage now. I get up on stage, and as I'm performing these beautiful songs, I'm tapping back into the most important, powerful emotional moments of my life, and it's tremendously rewarding, and people really connect with it. My lessons on Heartwood guitar are full of these kinds of tips. I work them into every lesson I teach, and they make all the difference. Just showing someone what notes to play or where to put your fingers to play a chord is not enough. Any instrument is hard to learn, and the guitar is no exception. So you want an excellent guide to help you through the inevitable trouble spots. I hope I can be that guide for you. My Black Friday sale ends Monday, 25% off all memberships. So if you want to sign up, now's the time. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving weekend. Take care.